Caleb, why don't you introduce us to why we went in the first place?
So this May, I had the opportunity to go with Judson University, where I'm getting my master's degree in Christian ministry, to the Holy Land for a study tour. My dad was able to come along. That was a huge blessing. I'm very grateful. So we went, May 16th to the 31st. And we're going to take a very quick tour of the Holy Land. There's a lot of content here. We'll try to go quickly. So one thing I just want to say as we start is, remember, in the Holy Land, in the ancient Holy Land, when they built a city or they looked for a place to settle, there were three main reasons they did that. It was close to water, it was a defensible position, and it was near a major trade route. Those are three major things to remember as we look through these locations. We're going to start with biblical locations, places that you can find in the Bible. So the first one is Caesarea by the sea. We went here the first day. So the first picture on the left, that's just me by the sign Caesarea National Park. On the right, we're going to see the inside of the amphitheater that Herod built there at Caesarea. This city was not near any source of water, so Herod the Great often didn't care if a place matched all three of these qualifications. He was very, very proud. He thought he was kind of like God. He was going to bend nature to his will. He didn't care. So he built Caesarea here, built this amphitheater.
Quick insight. So right behind Caleb, you can see that great body of water. That's the Mediterranean. And we didn't put any scriptures up here, but if you read the book of Acts, this is where Herod would have been during Acts, when all the stuff that was going on, and I don't think we have a stone of Pilate's stone, but this is where Pilate would have been. This is where Pilate lived during the year, and he would come back to Jerusalem for the feast. But this is where he lived. We're going to see the ruins of his palace coming up.
Yeah, so here we see just more of the Mediterranean. On the right side, you see this was Herod's lower palace. So up the hill there was more, but this was his lower palace down here on the right. He actually built a major harbor here. So he sunk basically what amounts to concrete made out of hay and clay and those kind of things. He sunk them into the harbor. He built this massive harbor here. Incredible feat of engineering. So right here on the left, you'll see these Roman arches. The Romans were famous for these. They created these. This is the aqueduct over here that Herod would have built. This thing was miles and miles and miles long. This is where they brought water in from miles away. There was no water here except for the sea. So, yeah, Herod didn't care that he was close to a body of water. He found a way to make that work here. So this is an incredible feat of engineering. It's still standing today. The next site we're going to look at is Tel Dan. Tel Dan can be found in the book of Judges chapter 18 and then in 1 Kings 12. It's a very, very significant historical site. So right here, see the sign, it says, "And the king arose and sat at the gate, and all the people came before the king." Tel Dan. So this is the gate of the city here that would have been built. This would have been in Judges 18. The men of the tribe of Dan were looking for a place to settle. They took the city of Laish and renamed it Tel Dan.
Let me just add something real quickly. Just so you know, based on the boundaries that God had given them coming out of Egypt, they settled in the wrong place. They didn't settle where they were supposed to. They went up here. Why? Because it was lush and fertile and all that kind of stuff. So they actually disobeyed God. But like Caleb said, if you want to read about Dan, you can read about them in the book of Judges. It's got some really cool stuff in there about Dan.
So this was when the people came in the city, they would have come to the king's throne here. This is our tour guide, Avi, showing us how the king would have stood on the throne. People would have lined up here and given gifts to the king. So this was a altar that was built here. In 1 Kings 12, we see the kingdom divides the northern and the southern kingdom. Jeroboam sets up his kingdom here, one of his kingdoms, and the people were supposed to go to Jerusalem to offer sacrifices at the temple. Jeroboam got really paranoid and said if they go to the southern kingdom to offer their sacrifices, they're going to become loyal to Jerusalem. They're going to kill me. So he said, I'm going to set up places where people can sacrifice. There's a cultic site. They would have done cultic rituals here. God was not happy with that. And the northern kingdom was wicked all the way through, and they ended up ultimately getting us destroyed by the Assyrians far before the southern kingdom for their sinfulness. This is significant. This is a gate here, if you can kind of see the arch. This is the oldest arch gate ever found in existence. And before they found this, they always thought the Greeks had created the oldest arch gate. It's also thought that Abraham walked through this gate back in the book of Genesis. It said he went as far as Dan and he was looking for Lot. So that's very significant. The next one we're going to look at is Bet Shean. This is where Saul and Jonathan were killed. After they were killed in battle, the Philistines came to the city and they nailed their bodies to the wall. So that's kind of cool, I think.
And these are the ruins of the city itself. I think Caleb has a slide in there. They're going to show us where the people lived, which is now covered by Muslim housing. So they can't archaeological dig it because the Muslims wouldn't like that. But this is the city proper itself. This would be like Nina, where the shopping is in Nina, and the outward would be where the people live.
This is extremely well preserved, as you can see, because it was destroyed in an earthquake, so it was just buried. So everything stayed preserved.
It's only been like 60 years since they uncovered this, and they're constantly doing archaeological digs in Israel. But I think it's like 60 years ago that this was uncovered, so it's fairly recently discovered.
Yeah, this is a very new site. So this is the Tell right here. So a Tell in Israel is an artificial hill. So it's a place where civilization after civilization would have conquered, and they would have just kept building on each other. So this hill was originally not even here. This was one civilization just conquers, then another, and they just keep building up. So this hill is all just cities that were built on top of each other. And this is the view of the city from on top of the hill. So this was the business district. Over here was where the people would have lived, which is now modern residential housing, so they can't uncover any more of that. So this is, there's an amphitheater here where they would have done a lot of plays, different events. These are the toilets that would have been right by the amphitheater. So you would have sat on these toilets. There were rows and rows and rows of these. People would have sat here with running water underneath and just done their business. And then this is right in front of the toilet. There would have been running water through here, so you would have just reached down and washed your hands afterward. This is actually Mount Gilboa, right outside of Bet Shean. This is where Saul and Jonathan were killed in battle, where he had his sword bearer run him through rather than fall at the hands of the Philistines. The next place we're going to look at is Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi is where Peter made his confession of faith that Jesus was the Lord. When Jesus asked him, "Who do you say that I am?" And he said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." This is where that took place. So this is, when you're first walking in, just a view of the mountain here. There's actually, we don't have a picture of it in here, but there was a temple, ruins of a temple here to the god Pan, the Roman god Pan. So Jesus tells Peter, he says, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. So this is filled in today, but this used to be a giant pit just down into the earth. And it was actually called the gates of hell, or the gates of Hades. So when Jesus said this, all of his readers would have understood, the readers of the gospel would have understood, oh, the gate of Hades, I know where that's at. So they would have made a lot of sense to the ancient readers. Capernaum is the next site that we're going to look at. Capernaum is known as the town of Jesus. This was, as Avi, our guide, told us, this was his headquarters for his ministry throughout the years. So here we see, this is me just standing by the gate. It's actually called Kafar Nahum, he said, which actually just means the town of Nahum. So it's just named after some guy named Nahum. We don't know who. So this is the ruins inside the synagogue. This is really significant because there's a lot of places in the Holy Land where we went and we said, we're pretty sure Jesus came here. We're pretty sure he was in this area, but we know for a fact Jesus actually taught in this synagogue. So to be standing here where you know Jesus, God himself stood, was really humbling experience.
And what's interesting is this is in the Gospels, this is where he had come out of the synagogue to go to Peter's house to heal Peter's mother-in-law. Do you remember that in the Gospels? This would have been the synagogue that he would have come from, and I don't think we have a picture of Peter's house, but literally Peter's house is probably about 100, maybe 100 or so feet away. So he would have walked out of the synagogue and then gone to Peter's house to heal his mother-in-law, which is really cool.
This is a view from the synagogue. Right outside the synagogue here, this would have been housing, probably for the rich, because the only people who could afford that were to live that close to the synagogue would have been wealthy people. And this is looking out on the Sea of Galilee. Capernaum is right on the sea.
And that picture on the left is my favorite picture from the whole trip. I'm going to have that framed. I did it on purpose because you can look through the porticos of the synagogue, and you can see the Sea of Galilee behind it, and it's just an absolutely gorgeous picture. So for anybody who's going to Israel with us, you'll get a chance to see that. That is absolutely gorgeous picture.
This is a stele. You can't really see it, but there's writing on here that talks about the sons of Zebedee. So would have been James and John, Jesus' disciples. So that's historical record that they were real. They existed here in Capernaum. Very significant. This actually, I do have a picture of it. This is the ruins of Peter's house, where Peter's mother-in-law would have lived, where Jesus would have done that healing. It also became a church, first century church, where Christians would have met. Like our guide Avi just made the joke that the reason that Peter denied Jesus was because he healed his mother-in-law, and he did not like that. So I thought that was funny. All right. And then, we're right on the Sea of Galilee here at Capernaum. So this is a picture from the shore. One of my professors, Dr. Dave, said this is the best place you'll see in all of Israel because it's the one place that has been completely unchanged. You know, you're seeing exactly what Jesus and his disciples would have seen 2,000 years ago. This is looking out on the shore, looking across. It's not a very big body of water. As you can see the other side right there. It's actually relatively small. This is my dad and I on a boat. We got to go sail on the Sea of Galilee. That was a really cool experience on one of our last days there. The Sea of Galilee.
Actually, right up the hill, I think, you can see the white things on the right-hand picture. That's banana plants that are growing. And right around there, that area would have been the Mount of Beatitudes, right in that area. So Jesus would have taught on the Mount of Beatitudes, that slope right there, right off the Sea of Galilee.
I believe this also would have been near where Jesus cast the demons out of the man who was living in the cave, who was chained up. We cast them all into the pigs, and they all ran into the sea. Would have been somewhere around here, because this was Gennesaret, so Gennesaret would have been right around this area. En Gedi is the next location we're going to look at. En Gedi can be read about in 1 Samuel 24, I believe. When Saul was pursuing David into the desert, he pursued him to En Gedi. This is in the heart of the desert. As you can see on the left here, very, very dry. It was like 100 degrees the day we went here. Extremely hot. And when you go here, you really appreciate why David had to come here. Around here, there's nothing but sand, rocks for miles and miles and miles. And then the Dead Sea is directly on the other side. So there's no water here except for at En Gedi. So you walk way back up through a pass up here, and you eventually come to this cave where there's this huge waterfall. The water is so pure you can actually still drink it today. So David would have had no choice but to come here with his men. It was probably either that or die of dehydration out in the desert. So it says when Saul came to look for David at En Gedi, that makes sense because where else would he have gone? So you can see this is the view from the top looking out on the Dead Sea here. This is another view just of the Dead Sea right here near En Gedi. This is also known as the Crags of the Wild Goats, if you read about it in 1 Samuel. And there are still herds of ibex here, giant, they're technically goats. They look kind of like antelopes. We'll see a picture of them later. We saw quite a few of them here at Engedi. So his readers, first century readers, would have understood when they said the crags of the wild goats. They would have known what that meant. Mount Carmel is significant because this is where Elijah defeated the prophets of Baal. So here we see a statue of Elijah. There's a monastery on the top of this mountain. See right here, there's the prophet of Baal, Elijah slaughtering them. He took them all and he chopped them into pieces after he defeated them on the top of Mount Carmel. This is a view of the Jezreel Valley from the top of the mountain. So looking down, where that would have been.
And another, I'm going to say another, for those who are doing the Revelation study, this is also called what? The plains of Megiddo, which is where, what's going to happen? There's going to be a battle there between Jesus and the Antichrist and his armies in this particular broad plain that you can see. And it's just incredible. The first time I saw it in the first trip, I just was standing on Mount Carmel looking at this and just going, oh my goodness, that's where Jesus is going to come back and he's going to fight the armies of Antichrist in the world. He's going to defeat them. He's going to slay them with the word of his mouth. And we get to see it. And by the way, for those of us who are pre-tribbers, I believe we will be with Jesus and watch him do this. So not only do we see it here, but I think we're going to get to see it in person as well.
Mount Carmel, a very significant place. The Jordan River is the next place we got to go. This is, you'll see it's kind of disgusting and really dirty here. So this is, the picture's taken from Israel. This is actually Jordan right here. So a whole different country. The border goes right through the middle of the river here.
I'm gonna give Caleb a quiz, and I know he'll pass it. Isn't he doing a great job this morning? Incredibly, in just the knowledge that he's. But remember earlier we saw Tel Dan, or Dan, where Dan settled. I did not know this until this trip. Tell him what Avi told us Jordan means.
Yeah. So at Tel Dan, there's a rushing river there. It's the River Dan. And the Jordan literally just means down from Dan. So the source of the water would have come from Tel Dan, which is up in the north. It would have flowed down. The Jordan River just means down from Dan. That's where the water is coming from. So nothing, it's not too much of a significant name, but just to say this is where the river comes from. So this is the traditional baptismal site of Jesus, where John baptized Jesus. That's just me in front of the baptismal site. You can see, like, over here, there's, like, a little bit of rope, if you can see that. People go down and were getting baptized in the river. It's really disgusting, so I would not recommend that. So the Judean wilderness is the next place. This is where Jesus would have gone out and been tempted by the devil for 40 days. This is what it would have looked like. Extremely barren, arid. It was really, really hot. Most days we were in Israel, it was over 100 degrees for the majority of the trip. So I didn't want to be out here for more than 10 minutes before I got back to the air-conditioned bus. So I couldn't imagine being out here for 40 days without food.
Yeah.
It would have been absolutely terrible.
Yeah, Caleb and I, after we saw this, Caleb and I were having a discussion on the bus and said, can you imagine, because we look at Jesus as being the Son of God, right? He was completely God, but he was also completely man, and what it would have been like in just arid heat like that, in that particular terrain, with no food for 40 days. The question we ask is, how did he survive? I believe the reason why he survived is he was strengthened by the Holy Spirit who dwelt in him.
There's some Bedouin shepherds that lived out there, and there's a working monastery. So some people do live out there in the desert. I don't know how. I would not want to do it. So Jerusalem. This is, you should all know Jerusalem. This is a big portion of the presentation here. So here you can see this is the Temple Mount. Absolutely massive. Herod would have beautified this. Herod the Great. So the Temple Mount would have been there. Solomon built the temple. Herod would have come along later and built it up. You can see the Dome of the Rock, the mosque that's been sitting there for, I think, well over 500 years. And this was taken from the Mount of Olives, is where this photo was taken from.
And remember, as we've gone through the Gospel of John, remember in John chapter 2, Jesus says destroy this temple and it'll be rebuilt in 3 days. And remember what the response of the religious leaders was? It took 46 years, which is not true. 46 years plus, it probably took more like 60 years to build. But in their thinking, they were thinking about this temple that Herod was building. Like, how in the world are you going to rebuild it in 3 days? And of course, we know what he meant, right, was the temple of his body.
So Jerusalem, once again. So this is the Kidron Valley right here that runs under Jerusalem. And on the other side of this would have been the Cheesemaker Valley. So there's two valley on each side. So once again, the Gihon Spring sits right outside Jerusalem, so a source of water. There's the two valleys, would have made it very defensible, and it was on a main trade route that ran along the coast. So it met all three qualifications for settling in the ancient world. This is taken from Jerusalem looking toward the Mount of Olives, would have been over to the right. This is known as the Mount of Ascension, and they built, you can see this church here that was built. This is where they believe Jesus would have ascended into heaven. This is the southern corner of the Temple Mount. So here you can see these square stones here. That would have all been Herodian stone that Herod would have built. It's a very distinct look. Everything from above that, from about here up, would have been Ottoman, built by the Muslims when they took control of Jerusalem.
And you can't see it because we don't have a picture, but if you were to walk away from the southern wall toward us, there was a series of porticos where the money changers would have been in the outer gate. Remember where Jesus tipped over the temples? Out here would have been the court of the Gentiles. The only place they could come and worship God was in that area. And there would have been a series of porticos where the money changers would have been sitting, exchanging money for the goats and the sheep.
So this is the Eastern Gate, also known as the Golden Gate. This is where Christ is going to walk through when he returns. And actually right here, and it's kind of washed out, but there's a Muslim cemetery built right here. The Muslims built that because they know that for Messiah, anyone Jewish to go through there, it would make them unclean. So they're saying, well, that'll keep Jesus out when he returns. He won't be able to walk over this cemetery. So that's why that's built there, so he can't come back through the gate.
Right. You can all laugh now. They think they're going to keep Jesus, Messiah, out of the Eastern Gate. Okay, whatever.
So this is a picture on the Palm Sunday Road. So it would have been coming down from Mount of Olives toward Jerusalem here. Jesus would have walked down this road during the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. This is just taken down in the Kidron Valley at the bottom of that hill. So the Mount of Olives is up here, and then the Temple Mount would have been up on this side. So this is a valley. It's more of a ravine than a valley. It's not very big, but enough that when they say they go down, they went down into the valley or up to Jerusalem. There's a lot of ups and downs in Israel, a lot of ups and downs. So anyone who's going should start practicing like a Stairmaster, just walking a lot of hills. It's a lot of work. In the city of David, the sign pointing to the old city. These are some ruins that would have been, they believe, I think, would have been part of David's palace, where our guide pointed out, everything's on a hill. You can see it's slanting down. So David's palace would have been up here. He pointed out when he saw Bathsheba, it would have been on a hill, so she probably would have been, kind of down, and it would not have been very far away. Would have given easy access to see everything below him. So just an interesting fact. This is the Garden of Gethsemane. So this is the gate to what they believe is the Garden of Gethsemane here. This is just kind of a picture of what it would have looked like. This is Golgotha, the place of the skull. So it's kind of hard to see. Well, this is what some people believe is Golgotha. I believe it is. There was also the Church of the Holy Sepulchre there, where they said they believe was Golgotha, where Jesus was buried. Not. This is much, much more likely to be Golgotha. So you can kind of see here there's an eye, another eye, and then the nose here. So it would have been the skull, the place of the skull. Jesus would have been crucified down here at the bottom of the hill, which is today a Muslim bus station. So the Christians do not like that at all.
And the other thing, a couple things I want to say about Golgotha is I was there in 2016 in May. And so exactly 6 years later, a part of the face had fallen off within 6 years. It's deteriorating. And the other thing I'll say is, and Caleb said he was crucified not on a hill far away, I believe, but he was crucified on the side of the road. Why? Because it would have been a deterrent to criminals in Rome. This is what happens to you. And as they were passing through for the Passover, they would have seen Jesus, would have easily mocked him. The crowds would have mocked him. I doubt the crowds and the religious leaders would have climbed up on a hill. I believe genuinely it was here as they were passing by, they hurled the insults that we see in Psalm 22, okay?
This is the garden tomb. So this is where they believe Christ was buried and where he rose. This garden actually is like a vineyard where they would have pressed wine. So that's really interesting. It's not like a flower garden. It was a garden literally to make wine. That was what they did there. One of the things they did best in ancient Israel. So this is a wine press here. People would have just come in here. They would have stomped the wine, and then it goes kind of down there. It would have gathered up there in that pool. This is the entrance to the garden tomb. It's very small inside, very small. There's the room to lay the body, and then just a little bit of room on the other side. Not very big at all. Press that. I don't know how that got back in there. Okay, so this is the Western Wall. The Western Wall is extremely significant to the Jews, extremely significant. Probably the holiest place that you'll find in all of Israel. To go in here, you have to go through security. It's very, very serious. So the Western Wall, this is the back side of the Temple Mount here. And the reason the Western Wall is so significant is because the temple would have sat with its back right up here. The Holy of Holies would have sat at the back of the temple. So this would have been the site closest to the Holy of Holies. As you can see, it's hard to see, but there's a lot of people here. Jews, devout Jews come here 24/7 every single day to pray, to read the Torah, to do their rituals. They're also very concerned with ritual cleansing, being clean. So they actually have these little fountains here with cups where the Jews go and they put water in them and they pour it over their hands as a sign of a ritual cleansing. Because they can't, before, in ancient times, they would go down into a ritual bath. They would walk down into a pool of water, walk back up to be cleansed, but now they still have these for cleansing.
And the interesting thing about the ritual baths, and I don't think we got a picture up here, but they actually would have two sides. They would have concrete in between, so you went down dirty and you came up clean. You didn't go, it's like, yeah.
Also, very different culture over there. Here, we, it's all about equality. Men and women are equal. Not in Israel. On this side, this is the women's side. Women only were allowed over here, and this is the men's side. So men and women were completely separate here. Another reason this is significant, the Temple Mount was built on Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah was where Abraham would have been told to sacrifice Isaac. This is where, according to Jewish tradition, Mount Moriah was where creation began. When God created the world, it would have started right here at the Temple Mount. And it's also the place where they say when you pray, your prayers are gathered, and this is where your prayers go up to heaven, is here at Mount Moriah, at the Temple Mount. This is very, very significant to them. And you can still go there. Oh, it's a picture of my dad praying there. So you can still go to the wall. People take little prayers, they write them on papers, and they stick them in the wall there. This is inside, so you can see the Jews, devout Jews, performing their rituals and praying. And then this is inside the tunnels, the Western Wall tunnels. So further down the wall is now the Muslim quarter. So the Jews have no access to that. They weren't very happy about that. So what they did was they dug underneath the Muslim quarter, and they excavated more of the wall. So you can go in these tunnels here and walk through. And this is just kind of a picture of the inside of those tunnels. We also went to Bethlehem. Bethlehem is very close to Jerusalem, about 5 miles. If you're in Jerusalem or Bethlehem, you can easily see the other one, very close. This is modern-day Bethlehem. It's a very small Christian population. Most of the people live there are Palestinian and Muslim. So the cool thing is we did get to go shopping there at a shop that's owned by Christians, and Christian families make intricate wood carvings and jewelry and all kinds of things. So we got to shop there and support the local Christians, which was really cool. This is the shepherd's field. So this is where they believe some of the shepherds might have been watching over their flocks when the angels came and announced the birth of Christ. An interesting thing is there's a lot of natural caves around here, so the shepherds would have been staying in caves. We had a local guide here who pointed that out, that they wouldn't have just been out in the fields, they would have literally been in caves. So we got to go into one of these caves here in Bethlehem and see where they would have stayed. I don't think I put a picture of it in here because
It was
a lot
taken
of
over
these,
by the
yeah, a lot of
Catholics.
these holy sites now have Catholic churches on them, so it's just very ritualistic, lots of icons in there, so not much to see. But there would have been a cave here we went into. This is the Church of the Nativity, the outside of that. So this is where they believe Christ would have been born traditionally, and our guide Avi kind of told us anytime we say traditionally, you really don't know. There's no way to know for sure. So we didn't really get a good picture of it because there was a group of, I don't know what, the Orthodox something that were down in here. They were singing and praying and kind of wanted us to get out. But this star is just where they believe the spot they say Jesus was born, the literal spot. But once again, we don't know for sure, but it was kind of cool to see. So we got to go to the Valley of Elah, which I think my dad already kind of showed you in one of his sermons here. So this would have been we would have been standing on Tel Azekah here, which is where Saul's army would have been when David fought Goliath. And that battle would have taken place somewhere down in this valley, and then the Philistines would have been up on this ridge here. So this would have been Israel's territory, and this was the Philistines' territory here. They had crossed over into each other's land, and were at a stalemate here. So instead of saying, hey, we're not just going to give you our territory and let you go further, they were basically at a stalemate where they couldn't move. This was down the valley we walked to. We walked through this valley over to the brook of Elah, which would have been somewhere over here. We found some smooth stones. It's a dry riverbed during the summer. During the winter, water still runs through there. But we found some smooth stones in there, just like David would have gone down and found the stones that he fought Goliath with. We're going to go to the Mount of the Beatitudes. These pictures might not be the greatest. It was kind of hard to get pictures here. So once again, yeah, it's made by the sign for the Church of the Beatitudes. It's a Catholic church now, so it's very, what's the word?
I mean, it's just
Kind of ritualistic.
kind of a sacred place for the Catholics.
So this is kind of where they would have said the Sermon on the Mount would have taken place, down on this hill here. Kind of hard to see, but yeah, this is kind of a better picture. So this is the Sea of Galilee right here, and this is where the sermon would have taken place. It's on this hillside. It's kind of a natural amphitheater, so his hearers who sat at the bottom of the hill could have heard him if he was standing up here at the top.
Want to stop and say, I don't know how we're doing for time. Quarter of? Keep going. Just keep going. Let's just
Right,
keep
so those are all the biblical sites. Most of the biblical sites that we saw. There was a lot of places. We went to 5, 6 locations a day. I mean, even within Jerusalem, there was a number of other places we went that I didn't get to put in here. So we also went to a number of historical sites, places that are not mentioned in the Bible, but are nonetheless extremely significant to Judaism, to Christianity, to our understanding of the Bible. The first one was Gamla. Gamla was the most difficult thing I've ever had to do, the most physically exhausting thing I ever thought I was going to do. I thought I was going to actually die on the way back up. A lot of tourists do not go here for this very reason, but our professor really wanted us to see this. This is in the Golan Heights. So this is Gamla here. The Jewish historian Josephus writes about Gamla, and he describes it as a camel's hump. So as you can see, it's this mountain. These are mountains on both sides. So this is a very deep valley right here. So up here, that's the top of the mountain, and this is me sitting on the top of the mountain. So I would have been sitting right up here. So this picture would have been taken from over here.
Yeah, and what's interesting is he talks about Josephus. is the Jewish historian that many people go to. He describes in detail a lot of what happened in Jewish history in the first century. But one of the things is he describes in detail the Jewish revolt, which would have taken place from 66 AD to 73 AD. And we're going to show you, the Gamla was the second one, right? Masada was, no, Gamla was first. Gamla would have been the first revolt that would have taken place. And the Romans would have gone toward Gamla, and they actually built houses up on those ridges. And we're going to see some pictures of a minute of some ruins. But they would have built, and the Romans would have driven there. The Romans would have been going through that valley. Can you picture that? Going through that valley with their equipment, heavy equipment, and would have been fighting them in the first revolt, which would have been, you say, 66, I think it was, AD.
So this was part of the Great Jewish Revolt. I could hardly walk this in hiking boots, and when I was prepared, I couldn't imagine walking this in armor and carrying siege weapons. So once again, very difficult to siege, a very defensible position, which is why they built this here. This is a view from Gamla, so down on the side of the mountain, looking out. You see it's a ravine here. So to siege this would have been extremely difficult. So the Romans sieged Gamla in 66. They destroyed this city. According to Josephus, 3,000 to 4,000 Jews, he said, threw themselves to their death off the walls rather than be captured by the Romans. So the pictures don't really do it justice, but this was extremely steep. If you fell off here, you would have died. So this is the synagogue at Gamla that the Jews would have built. This is significant because this is the best preserved synagogue in all of ancient Israel. You're not going to find anywhere else in the world with a better preserved ancient synagogue. So you said there's steps here. Professor got to stand here, and we got to sit around. He got to lecture us. We kind of got to see what it was like to be in a first century synagogue. That was really
there would have
cool.
been, if I remember right, from one of the professors, anywhere from 8 to 10 synagogues that they found ruins for, and this would have been the most well preserved of all of them. This was my picture.
Oh, yeah.
Up on the top.
So these are cows up here. So I'll let my dad talk about this. I only put this in because he was so excited to talk about it.
So this is from near Gamla, and I saw this and I looked up. You can't see it really well, but those dark, long things, those are cows. Those would have been the cows of Bashan. You say, well, what are the cows of Bashan? In Psalm 22, when Jesus is when we have the prophetic prophecy about Jesus on the cross, he said, the cows of Bashan would have surrounded me. So the Holy Spirit was speaking through David. That would have been prophetic to Jesus, talking about the cows of Bashan surrounding him. And I just thought that was kind of cool. It's like, oh, look, cows of Bashan. Got to have a picture of that, right?
So Qumran is the next place we went. This was on the way to the Dead Sea. It's out in the desert. A lot of you have probably heard of Qumran. This is a place where the Essenes would have lived. They were a Jewish sect that would have thought that the Jews who lived in Jerusalem and all of them were
not holy enough.
Yeah, not holy enough. They had to be separate. So they came out and they lived in the desert. This is their their village here that they would have built up. The Dead Sea is right here. It was very hot again this day, like 100 degrees, so I would not want to live out here in the desert with no air conditioning. It's pretty terrible. Qumran's significant because this is where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls are the most important archaeological find of all time. When they found these, some Bedouin shepherds found these in the cave. They didn't know how significant they were. They ended up selling them multiple times to different antiquities dealers until they finally came into the hands of, I believe, Israel. Got their hands on them, people at the Hebrew University and all. The Dead Sea Scrolls contained large passages of the Old Testament. And that's important because before the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, the latest texts that we had were called the Masoretic texts, and they came from the medieval periods. The Dead Sea Scrolls were from over 1,000 years earlier, and they were extremely accurate to what we had in the Masoretic text. So we can see that the Bible had not changed over the course of 1,000 years and gave us a much, much, much earlier version of the text, which is much earlier than any other ancient text. This is the most accurate version of the text that we have, more so than Plato, Homer, any of those, Socrates, any of those ancient philosophers. The Dead Sea Scrolls are just can't overstate the significance of them to the Bible.
And I believe they were found in 1937, if I remember the date right. And to go back to what Caleb said, for people who say, well, how do you know the Bible's true? Well, nobody questions Plato's work. Nobody questions Aristotle's work or any of those antiquities. Why do we question the Bible? And like Caleb said, these are significant because they prove that the Bible is incredibly accurate to what was written in the Old Testament.
Yeah, so the Dead Sea Scrolls, very important. This was one of the caves here, the caves at Qumran, where the scrolls were found. I believe this is Cave 4, where the majority of the scrolls have been found. This is just a zoomed-out view, so there's Cave 4 they would have excavated. And not all the scrolls here were biblical. There was a lot of extra-biblical things, like the deuterocanonical books like 1st and 2nd Maccabees.
Also community rules.
Community rules, a lot of things that said about how the Essenes lived. Like they didn't have toilets there. If they needed to go to the bathroom, they would have gone out into the desert, dug a hole, done their business, and buried it. Crazy things like that. They also found a lot of evidence of writing tables at Qumran, so they know that the Essenes would have been the ones writing these Dead Sea Scrolls. And there's some people who say John the Baptist was an Essene, but there's no proof for that. Just because he lived out in the desert doesn't make him an Essene. So Qumran, very, very, very significant to our faith. Masada, this was a few miles down, probably about, 10 miles so down from Qumran. This is a palace that Herod would have built. This is out on the top of a huge rocky plateau. It's 300 yards straight down, so it's like 3 football fields on all sides. This would have been the last stronghold of the Jews during the revolt. After the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70, the Jewish rebels came and they took up residence here. It would have been almost literally impossible to siege. Herod was extremely paranoid of anyone taking his power, so he built this palace where he could escape and be extremely well defended. Once again, not too close to water, so Herod didn't really care about that, but extremely defensible. This here, you can see, this is the siege ramp the Romans would have built to siege the wall. This was taken from the top of the wall where the Romans breached it. This siege ramp took them a couple years to build. They actually would have had their Jewish captives building this so that the Jews on top of the wall could not attack them because they knew Jews would never kill other Jews. Where if the Romans were building it, they could be shooting them with bows and arrows and spears, throwing spears at them. So they knew that if they did that, the Jews could not stop the construction of this ramp. Right here, you can kind of see this wall. This is a Roman legion camp, still intact, where they would have camped out outside of Masada to intimidate the Jews. They would have just put up camps all around. They built a wall to surround the entire fortress. A lot of people say Masada, there was a mass suicide here. Josephus wrote about this again. At Gamla, Josephus actually was there with the Romans. He had been captured by the Romans. At Masada, he actually wasn't here. He was going off of different, accounts of the things that happened. One interesting thing is that Josephus would have been trying to make the Jews seem like an honorable people to the Romans, because the Romans would have been reading his history of the revolt. And committing suicide was much more honorable than fighting the Romans. So chances are the Romans actually just came up here and slaughtered all the Jews. That's most likely what happened. But Josephus wrote that there was a mass suicide because that would have been more honorable for them as a people. Tel Megiddo. So this would have been another tell, a place where civilization after civilization built on top of each other. This is a national park, Tel Megiddo National Park. These are some of the ruins. It's believed that when Israel took this, that King Solomon would have built up Israel's portion of this hill. There was a number of stables up here where horses would have been kept, where soldiers would have stayed. Once again, very, very strategic position. It had been taken a lot of times. It was right along a major trade route through the Jezreel Valley. It was right near the water and extremely defensible being up on this hill. So when the city was under siege, they actually built this water system. So there's stairs, a lot of stairs you had to go through. You go down in this tunnel, and then there's this long bridge. And when you get to the end of this bridge, they were down a place where water would have pooled up. So instead of having to go outside the city, they went down through this tunnel, went down to the other end, and there was a secret entrance that was covered here where they would have gathered their water. They would have come back through up the stairs with the water, so they could have supplied water to the city without ever having to leave and make themselves vulnerable.
And I think one of the things that Caleb and I recognize, and we'll share more after the meal, but what we really recognize is our modern conveniences. I mean, today, if you want water, what do? You go turn on the tap, right? Back then, you had to you had to dig for your water. You had to have springs, you had to have the wells, and you had, and all that. And so that was really something that hit us, was really significant, that they would have to dig these, tunnels for these wells.
Yeah, and one thing I didn't mention, at Masada, that would have been 10 miles from En-Gedi, where there was the oasis. So the Romans, when they sieged Masada, well, Herod actually built huge aqueducts there, reservoirs where when it rained, they would have filled up. So Herod's palace would have been filled with water. The first thing the Romans did was they cut off that access to that water, so the Jews would not have any source of water. And then they actually traveled 10 miles every day to En-Gedi to gather water and bring it back, which would have been not fun at all. But it had to be done. So Herod didn't care about being close to water. Once again, this is the Valley of Jezreel, the broad plain of the earth taken from Megiddo. This is where, like my dad said, the final battle between good and evil is going to take place when Christ returns and he destroys the armies of Satan. Just really cool to see that in person, to know that's where that's going to take place. Herodium. This is a place that's also not very touristy, and not a lot of tourist groups go here. It was one of Herod's palaces that he built. He actually built this here. It's not very far outside of Jerusalem, a couple miles. Herod was attacked here. He was fleeing from some enemy who I can't remember off the top of my head. His carriage flipped. His mother got injured. He thought she was going to die. So he was going to commit suicide because his mother was dying. He didn't even want to be alive without her. Luckily, she didn't. So to commemorate the place where he almost committed suicide, he built a palace. So this is Herodium. This is significant. A lot of these just look like rocks, ruins, but it's a pretty interesting place because Herod built this up as a huge palace. The Jews really hated him, so he turned this into his mausoleum, and this is where he was buried. They found Herod the Great's tomb. It was Netzer, who's a Jewish archaeological scholar. He actually found Herod's tomb here at Herodium, so extremely significant. Unfortunately, he died shortly after. He fell here to his death at Herodium shortly after discovering the tomb, so that's very tragic. But the Jews would have come here after Herod. The reason it was so difficult to find is the Jews came and completely desecrated Herod's tomb after he died because they hated him so much. So it was not left in good condition. This is significant. That was a roof there at Herodium. That's the only intact roof in all of ancient Israel from the ancient times. The only intact roof. Everything else is crumbled to pieces. Then we walked the Jesus Trail. The second half of the trip, we hiked the Jesus Trail from Kibbutz Lavi to Capernaum. So it took us about 22 miles. It was very, very hot. So this is the Horns of Hittim. That was the beginning of our trip. We hiked up to the top of this here. This picture was taken from the top of the Horns of Hittim. This is the tallest city in terms of elevation in all of Israel.
And what's interesting is Avi, our tour guide, pointed out that the Jews believe that, or the scholars believe that the city on the hill, in Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount where he says the city on the hill, that's probably what he was talking about. And I wish I had gotten a picture of that, of these cities at night, because they are lit up and you cannot mistake them. So the highest point he probably would have been talking about would have been the city on the hill right here.
I'm trying to remember what this is. Oh, this is a picture from the top of the Horns of Hittim, just looking down. This is Arbel right here, the town of Arbel, looking out toward the cliffs of Arbel. These are the cliffs of Arbel. We actually ended up hiking up these. This used to be intact, looking toward the Sea of Galilee. Earthquake destroyed that. So on our hike, we headed toward the cliffs of Arbel. So we hiked down the cliffs of Arbel. So this was extremely steep. You can see my dad coming down here. There was little handholds here. This was straight up and down, 90 degrees. We had
Fell.
we had someone in our group who was afraid of heights, and this was absolutely horrifying for him because if you fell here, you were in really bad shape.
Death.
You were holding on for dear life going down these cliffs. These cliffs are also significant because during the Jewish revolt, there were some caves on the side of these cliffs. Jewish rebels would have hidden in these caves. So the Romans built a giant wooden basket, a box. They would lower it down the mountain. They would actually pull the Jews out of the caves and throw them to their death, probably hundreds and hundreds of feet down this mountain. So this was a stronghold for Jewish rebels as well. This is the Jesus boat. At the end of our trip, we had stayed at a kibbutz, a Jewish work community, and this boat was found in the 1970s. A couple of brothers found this at Gennesaret, which is where we stayed, in the Sea of Galilee. So this was a huge undertaking for them to recover this boat. They believe this is from the time of Jesus, thousands of years old. So this is now at a museum right there. They don't know if Jesus rode in this boat. They just call it the Jesus boat because that's from the time of Jesus, but very significant historical find for them. And then finally, we have the plants and animals of the Holy Land. Very different terrain. And so right here, that's not a great picture of it, but this plant is what is called Christ's thorn. If you look at this close up, this is covered in long thorns, very long thorns. And this is what the Romans would have taken and twisted together to make the crown of thorns they put on Jesus at the crucifixion. When you see it up close, you would not want to get stabbed by one of those thorns.
And the one on the right is really cool. I took that picture because they call it the Jonah plant. And they believe that this was the plant. Remember in Jonah chapter 4? Or Jonah chapter 3, chapter 4, where Jonah's out in the shade and he's bemoaning and all that, and God grows up the plant to give him an illustration. They believe this is the plant that God would have grown up over him. And they just call it the Jonah plant. I thought that was kind of cool. It relates to the Bible.
The castor oil plant. I know when I first showed my family, I thought it was marijuana, but it is not. It is a castor oil plant. Just like things like palm trees. You don't see that around here, so I just thought that was cool. It's a terebinth tree. This was in the Garden of Gethsemane.
And the terebinth is mentioned in Scripture. If you type in terebinth, you can find the terebinth tree mentioned in Scripture in numerous places.
Is
A date.
avocado?
Yeah, that's
Is that an avocado?
avocado.
So it's on the Jesus Trail. We just walked through like in a grove of avocados. You see those growing on the side of the road. This is pomegranate
That's
tree.
their bet sheen.
Betchine. Yeah, so you just see a lot of these things growing as they're just walking along these trails, these plants growing that, we have to go to the grocery store to get these kind of things, but they can just walk along the side of the road and find these, which is really cool. These are thistles. So as we walked the Jesus Trail, there was a lot of thistles in Israel. A lot of people's legs were kind of cut up after walking on this trail. It was
And how many of you remember what part of the consequence in Genesis 3 was to Adam when he sinned? Thorns and thistles, right? That's why I took the picture, because it reminds us of what would have happened as a result of the fall in Genesis 3.
God wasn't kidding. He put a lot of thistles in
Thistles
Israel.
everywhere.
A lot of thistles. These are cactuses on the right here. This was at Sepphoris, a town that's near Nazareth. A lot of cactuses. Just thought that was really cool. Oh, wait, this is an avocado here. Maybe that other one was the date tree. Yeah, that's the avocado plant. This is the carob tree.
On the way to Capernaum, remember? And one of the things that was really cool, and I was stopping to take pictures, so Avi was moving on, but I did hear him say that the carob tree, and I actually brought some home. Carob, if you break it open, it's like got chocolate inside. You can eat the chocolate, so you can imagine walking along, breaking off a carob and snacking on it, right? You don't have to go to your cupboard. You can just walk down the trail.
Yeah, and then we had animals. So these are donkeys out in the Judean wilderness. They would have belonged to the Bedouin shepherds. So here are people riding donkeys in Scripture. People still use them today in Israel for travel, for carry their packs to ride on. I know it's hard to see. We had to take it from the bus, but these are the ibex at En-Gedi. There was a whole herd of them that crossed the road. This is actually the place where the largest population of them today out in the wild. They're a protected species, so endangered, protected there at En-Gedi. The wild goats that the readers who read the Old Testament originally would have been like, oh yeah, I know what the wild goats are.
Or that's the pigs.
Oh yeah, there's a couple baby pigs there. You can't really see them, but we saw a couple baby pigs just out in the wild, which you also don't see. And then turtle here on the Jesus Trail. A lot of animals. So we say Jesus Trail. We say trail very loosely. There was a number of places we had to chop through with machetes. So this is not a completely finished trail. I think that is everything. So that is just a very, very quick run through of the Holy Land. So anyone who has the opportunity to go, I would encourage you. It's really a life-changing experience. Gives you a much better appreciation for what the characters in the Bible went through. Really, for me, it was Jesus' humanity. As I was there sweating bullets every day, you think of Jesus, oh yeah, he was human, but until you're there and you think, okay, he was here too. He was sweating like crazy. He was looking for his next drink of water, just like I was. It gives you a much better understanding of Christ and of everyone. David at En-Gedi out in the desert, and just the pictures used in Scripture of water and trees and the desert. Much better appreciation. So anyone who gets to go, I would encourage you to go. It really is a life-changing experience.
Caleb, great job. Good job, Caleb. And for those who are able to stick around, after we have our meal, we'll have a chance for you guys to ask questions, and we probably would like to share, because somebody asked me this morning, are you going to share kind of your experience and how it impacted you? And we'll do that. So that'll entice you to stick around for a meal. We'll share a little bit about how it impacted us, and it's just hopefully that gives you a better picture of